So today we're going to be talking about books that make me cry. I haven't done this video yet on my channel, so these will be books that have made me cry since I started doing booktube. And then maybe at the end of each year, I'll just do like a books that made me cry this year. Anyway, I have quite a few books on this list, so I'm just going to get right into it, or my kids are going to be home from school before I'm even done filming this. And so for starters, let's just hold up like every Fredrik Backman book in existence. Okay, I don't have all of them. I am missing Britt Marie, and I am missing, I think, 1 or 2 novellas. That being said, every single one of these books, I'm not quite done Us Against You, but I've already cried once in this book, but every single one of these books has had me crying. Like, Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, 70 pages, and I sobbed. Like, I was like heaving and sobbing, and I was so heartbroken reading it. I just, like, all the feelings, and Fredrik Backman just scoops them out and throws them in the blender and just like shreds my heart every single time. So I'm not going to go through every single individual book, but pretty much if you're going to read Fredrik Backman, like, have tissues nearby, you're going to cry. Next, I have kind of an underrated book, and this is a book I don't even know if I would necessarily recommend, but it hit really hard with me because it's about a guy whose brother passes away and his father's passed away and his mother gets extremely reclusive, and it's sort of a story of him trying to pull his mother like back to earth. Like, he's just trying to get her to like be there, and it's just so heartbreaking, like so heartbreaking. And mainly I think I identify with it because I did have a brother who passed away and my other brother is estranged, and so reading this just hit me right in the feels with the main character. I can't even remember his name right now, but this was a random buy from Goodreads that I wasn't expecting a whole lot from, and why I don't recommend it or talk about it very often is because I don't think a lot of people would like it. And also there are a couple scenes that are like extremely cringy and kind of weird and probably could have been done without. But it just resonated with me. I read this last year, and still when I think about it, like, I think maybe I want to read that again. And it hit me so hard. And I wasn't sobbing through it, but it definitely, like, I felt some kind of a weird connection with it that I really like this book, but it's not for everybody, like, by any means. So sticking with a couple more contemporaries, Letters to the Lost was beautiful. I loved this story. This is a YA, which I'm usually not a huge fan of. That's not a judgment or anything like that. I just find that I don't connect with those stories as much, but this one was like an exception to the rule. I loved the main characters. I can't even remember their names right now. Declan and Juliet. I loved them. I thought they were super sweet. It's kind of like a love to hate kind of a thing. Secret letters, which is like definitely a thing that I like. But it's about a girl who loses her mother and Declan who loses his sister, I believe. And it's just so incredibly sad. I definitely bawled a whole bunch. I read this before I was annotating. I do want to reread it at some point and tab it, just show where all the places that made me cry were, I guess. But I really, really liked Letters to the Lost. It was really, really good. And there is a companion novel, More Than We Can Tell, that I've been meaning to get to all year and I haven't yet. But I have a feeling that that one will probably make me cry too, especially because it follows Rev, who is one of my favorite characters. He's a side character in this one, Declan's best friend. And then next, you guys probably knew this was going to be in here because I literally sobbed all over this book, and I can't talk about it enough. I just can't, and I'm sorry, but I'm not really sorry. Bridge of Clay by Marcus Zusak is one of my favorite books of all time. There are so many stories within stories in this book, and I understand, like, I completely understand how starting this book can be daunting, and it can feel really heavy, and it can just feel like, why am I reading this? I didn't really feel like that, but I could see how someone would feel that way, if that makes sense. But it's so, it was so good, and there's just so many characters to love, and there's some romance, and it's really sweet, and it's slow, and there is death, and there's, oh my goodness, it's so, I can't. Like, thinking about it makes me want to cry. And I want to reread it so bad. I haven't yet, but like, all the blue tabs are where I cried because I was sad, and some of the pink ones are where I cried because I was happy. But I loved it. I loved this story. It has one of like my favorite sort of tropes in it, which is like orphans. They're not orphans. Their mother passed away and their father leaves, and the oldest brother is looking after all of his younger siblings. There's 5 Dunbar boys, I believe, and they take care of each other, and they're raising each other, and their dad is gone and their mother is dead, and the oldest brother, this is where it gets confusing. The dad's name is Michael, I think. And so Matthew is telling the story. He's the narrator, but he's telling the story that Clay told him. And Clay is telling the story that his mother told him about his father and her past and everything. And I know that sounds like a story and a story and a story, which I kind of love stories and stories, which is maybe why I loved Wuthering Heights, because it's literally a story in a story. But I adored this book so much, and whenever people say that they want to read it, I get excited and nervous because I don't want them to hate it, but excited because I want them to message me about it, and I want them to tell me everything that's going on, and I want to just relive it with them because I am so completely obsessed with this book, and a reread will happen someday. It has to. I think that's it for like contemporary books. Gonna get into like historical fiction now. You guys have seen this one many a time, All the Light We Cannot See. I adored this book. It broke my heart. It just left me in pieces. My only recommendation is to stop about 20 pages before the actual end. Like, there is a point in this book where something happens and it broke me, and then I felt like the ending sort of took the edge off of that heartbreak a little bit, and I didn't get to feel it as hard as I wanted to. But the writing in this book is so beautiful. It's so poetic. It's so amazingly good. It is just incredible. I was sucked in from the first page, and I just couldn't put it down, and I just adored this story so much. Plus, look at this. It is super floppy, which is always a win. And then we've got The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak, and I also sobbed like a baby through this book. My husband like came down the hallway when I was finishing it, and he was just like, "Are you okay?" And I was just a sobbing puddle. I was literally crying so much I didn't even stop to put as many tabs in as I would have, because I was just couldn't pause myself to do that. I just loved it, and I loved the characters, and I loved the story. It was so incredibly well done. It's narrated by Death, and Marcus Zusak does this thing where he'll tell you something that's gonna happen. Like, he'll literally say like, "Oh, don't worry, this isn't the part where this person dies." And like, you know that person's gonna die, and you're like, at first it's like, "Oh, is that a spoiler?" But then you get there and you sob even harder because you knew it was coming, but like you didn't know when it was coming, and so you fall in love with this person, and then they die anyway, and you're just, oh, and you can't save them, and it sucks. And this book just broke my heart. I feel like most people have read The Book Thief by now, but if you haven't and you love historical fiction, the narrative is a little bit odd. I feel like Marcus Zusak has an interesting narrative. And I would say these books are not alike. They're not. Like, he has a similar style in the way that a book will feel and in his narrative. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but there's like a feeling that is similar, but they are two like entirely different things. So I wouldn't like, because you like this doesn't mean that you'll like this, and if you're expecting this to be this, you'll be disappointed because they're just not one and the same. They're very different, even though they're written by the same person and there are similarities. They're very, very different stories. And next we have Montauk, which also made me cry like a little baby, and it was probably one of the most surprising reads of this year because I wasn't expecting to love it like I did. I couldn't put this book down. I loved Beatrice. She was so sweet, and I felt so bad for her, and her husband was such a bag of eggplants, and oh my word, I just wanted her to be happy. I just wanted her to be happy, and it just, It's so good. This is like a historical romance where Beatrice, our main character, her husband talks her into spending the summer at this Montauk mansion, which is like a big house outside of a fishing village called Montauk. And she goes there for the summer, and her husband is not the most faithful man in the world, and she finds out, and it's just really sad. And so she's spending the summer with all these people who she doesn't necessarily even like, and she befriends some people in the town, and there is like a forbidden romance, but also like you're vying for it because like this guy is just dreamy. And like, once you read it, you'll understand why, because it's like not something I would normally be into, but her husband sucks. He is the worst. And so I just loved this story, and the ending was like, it like broke me, and I don't want to say too much, but oh my word, it was so good. And especially for a debut novel, like this is so good. And then we've got A Gentleman in Moscow, which wasn't like, you know, this deep, guttural, heart-wrenching sob story, but there were parts in it where things happened and like I did tear up and I did cry here and there. But this was like mostly I loved this. It wasn't as heartbreaking, but it definitely did catch me up and did make me cry on occasion. And also I loved this story. I thought the narrative was great. The writing was beautiful. The count was just wonderful. And I just really adored this story. Definitely not as like sob-inducing as some of the rest, but did still make me cry. And then last but not least, we're going to bring some fantasy up in here. And I have the Mistborn Trilogy, which I can't hold up in one hand because they're too gigantic. This trilogy had me sobbing, like freaking sobbing, broke my heart, killed characters, like just broke my heart. And I loved every second of it. I am so glad that so many people have recommended Brandon Sanderson to me, and I'm so glad that I have finally read these. I need to read the second trilogy, but I didn't want to read them right away because like my heart was too broken from these and I wasn't ready to let go of it yet. I feel like I'm getting closer to being able to move on to the next one where I'm not going to be comparing them to each other super hard. I feel like I didn't really say much about it, but I never know how to talk about this because when they're so long, you can't really sum them all up. But essentially this has, and again, I don't really know how to talk about fantasy yet. I'm still learning how to like, you know, terminology, all that stuff. What I can say is I loved it and it broke my heart, but it just has such a great group of friends, a great cast of characters, really lovable, really funny. It's just, it's so good. And so essentially the first book, and I'm not going to go into the next two, but the first book is like set around a heist where they're trying to get rid of this guy who is horrible and has been like oppressing people for years and years and years, but obviously there's a little bit more to it than that. But it is so good, and I feel like everybody by now knows what Mistborn is about, so I don't have to sum it up too much. Goodreads is a good place to find out things about books, but I really, really loved the story, and I'm so glad that I found it, and I've started reading the Stormlight Archive and loving it. I read the first book, and that has nothing to do with this video. Anyway, okay, so these are all the books that have made me cry in like the last year and a half or so. I really, really loved these. These are also like some of my favorite books of all time. Usually if a book makes me cry, like I said, it ends up being like on top of the list. I just love it. I just love having a good chunk of heartbreak. Anyway, as always, don't forget to leave me a comment down below. What have you been reading lately? You guys know I always like to know what you guys are reading and what you guys are into. What was the most recent book you read that made you cry? That's always a good thing to add to my list as well. And while you're down there, if you haven't hit subscribe already, please do, and don't forget to hit the bell next to it. I do upload most Mondays and Thursdays, and I will talk to you guys all in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.
No, not to it. No, I don't need the trouble. I can't think straight, can't concentrate. Feels like I'm seeing double.